Hi everyone, my name is Miles and I'm with Peak Performers. Welcome back to another episode of Disability Weekly. I'm so glad to see y'all here. Please take a second to introduce yourself into the chat. We have a really special guest here today named Rupa Belor, and she's going to be talking with me a little bit more about what it's like to be diagnosed with autism, particularly later in life. You know, a lot of times within this conversation, we get focused around the experience of being diagnosed early on in life and having a series of supports, a sense of community, and a sense of identity from a very early stage. But what does that look like if you are diagnosed later in life? Also, what does that look like if you are a man versus a woman, or depending on the color of your skin, or even your cultural background? We've got a lot to discuss today. But having said all that, I want to welcome you back to the show right here. Apologize for not being able to join you last week. I was at Disability in the Global Expo that was specifically for promotion of disability within work culture. It was a fantastic event. There was about 3,000 attendees there, and I did do a post earlier this week summarizing my overall experiences with that. Having said all that, I want to welcome Rupa to the stage. Rupa, it's good to see you.
You, Miles, and thank you for having me here.
I'm so glad to see you here. Well, real quick, give us an overview of who you are.
Certainly. My name is Rupa Belur, and I'm the founder of Belur Neurodiversity Consulting and Coaching Miles here in Austin, Texas. I do see people from all over the United States as well. And I have spent my last 23 years working with individuals who are neurodivergent. We just did not use that term many years ago, largely referred to as autism spectrum disorder, but the vocabulary has grown and changed. So I worked in different capacities in Canada. I worked as a clinician. I did a lot of diagnostic work as well as therapy, school consultation. And I do see children, adults, adolescents, parents, and I also did couples therapy for neurodivergent couples in the past. So that's kind of a quick overview of what I do. And here in Austin, Texas, I work as a consultant and coach for people who either identify themselves as neurodivergent or are diagnosed, but again, work with the entire developmental lifespan and offer support for parents as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate particularly kind of the international perspective that you provide, having worked in the US, worked in Canada, and then being from India yourself. You offer really kind of a global perspective on this with many different countries around the world. But before we get started, I did want to give a quick disclaimer. I currently would self-identify as neurotypical, and I would encourage anybody that is watching us live to share your own comments and your own perspectives, especially if you yourself identify as neurodivergent. Lived experience is something that really matters to me a whole lot, so I do want to make sure that I captured that as much as possible. Again, hope to make this interactive. Please do include your thoughts and your comments throughout the course of today's conversation. So Rupa, I want to explore first off kind of like the experience of being diagnosed. What is that experience like for many of the people that you've worked with? Like, is it a sense of relief? Is it a sense of identity? Is it a sense of having answers? Or is it a sense of confusion? Like, what's it like for many of the people that you work with, and how do they feel after they receive a diagnosis for autism or other neurodivergent conditions?
All of the above, Mike, that you mentioned, I think often I hear a sense of relief. I would also add there is some self-compassion. If I could anecdotally quote what people have said, they have said to me that, for once, I believe that I'm not a bad person. And it actually breaks your heart to hear that. But they've grown up with a lot of self-criticism as well as internalizing criticism, judgment, and negative experiences from the community, be it school, workplace, university. Most often when they come to me, they are in university, post-secondary, or working parents. So it is a combination of a sense of relief. There are people who have told me I can breathe for the first time, knowing that I'm able to validate my life experiences and everything that I've been through. I'm not the quirky, odd, crazy, bad, self-centered person that I've often considered to be. So it really gives a vocabulary and understanding of what is beneath the surface or the why of a certain presentation or a predisposition. So it is validating. That being said, Miles, it also adds a lot of confusion to what you just described. It also causes a sense of what's next because the adult world is often not driven by the best supports. For some reason, if I could speak for India, Canada, America, the three countries, I've, the cross-cultural or even from a systemic perspective, if I may say so, there is a lot of support on an average for children. And what I've historically seen is that somewhere, it's still there in middle school. High school, there's a depletion of it, and it disappears after high school or at that post-secondary level. So there is that sense of overwhelm, if I may say so, about what happens now that I am diagnosed. There's relief, there's more compassion, validation, but what's next? What do those supports look like? How do I explain this to people at my workplace? Will there be a sense of judgment? What about my family, my ecosystem, right? So there is a lot of fear as well, along with that sense of relief and the fear of the unknown, of what happens next with this. And that unknown is not a very happy place for a lot of us, including the neurodivergent individuals.
And how would you explain this? Like, let's say you recently got diagnosed and you are 40 years old and you go back into your workplace and you do want to describe your experience to other people. Like, how would you even go about doing that?
Very valid question, but also very unique to each person. For example, I can think of a situation where I had an accountant who was asked to work from the office 4 days a week post pandemic. And that's kind of when he received his diagnosis. So it took a lot of work to help him advocate and communicate that in a manner that he's respected minds. I think that's really important because, as you're very aware, and a lot of us have heard that statement, you met one person with autism, you only met one person. But what does that really look like in translation, right? For example, accessing those supports, there's a huge discrepancy. So my guidance or the way I work with the individual, they're my best teacher. So I always learn from everybody I work with. Is can you get, one is, are you comfortable to disclose? I think that is the first question. Two is, if you are, what does that conversation look like? Are there certain sensory supports that you need in place? Do you need a corner office? Some adaptations with lighting. Can we advocate for one more day of work from home if it's appropriate? I've written lengthy letters of accommodation to several organizations talking about, can communication modality primarily be via email? Can it be more through written communication? And with boardroom meetings, would this individual be allowed to participate via a video call? Can they shut their camera off? And also really explaining the value of the work productivity when these accommodations are put into place. It's not just not merely asking, but also validating how the productivity would be there from the individual, because you're really reducing the source of stressors that would impede performance, impede productivity, right? So you're helping the person flourish in a manner that respects them. So that would be one thought. Even talking to your spouse is a big thing. It could be, what does that look like for university accommodations? How do I go talk to my children, my wife, my parents about this? I've had adults who are 45, 50 who are very fearful about talking about this to their partner or even their parents, right? So it really depends what that ecosystem is, what that relationship dynamic is across different environments.
And what are they afraid of typically? Is it just being judged differently or perceived differently? Like I'm trying to imagine kind of like particularly with interpersonal relationships within the family, what are people typically expressing to you as their primary fears?
I One of the primary fear is, I think, both across families and work, maybe larger in workplaces. A common denominator that I've heard, Miles, is there seems to be a tab on, kind of there's often a vocabulary they hear about setting limitations. Right away, there's a sense of limitations that's set with expectations. Oh, around it while still helping the person flourish and excel in what they like to do.
Hmm. Now, out of curiosity, like it's a totally different experience when you grow up from a very young age having access to support. So, say for example, you're given accommodations throughout school. Perhaps you have a personalized education plan. Perhaps you everybody around you already kind of knows this about you. So many people that are adults may even ask the question of why seek out kind of like a diagnosis. And we talked about kind of like identity accommodations and things like that. But I was wondering if you could explore a little bit more about it. Like, what's the value to an individual person beyond that? Should they only come and seek out a diagnosis if they're struggling, or is there other reasons beyond that?
It's a huge pool of reasons. Like there's so many miles. I've had people who've come to me just to understand why am I different. They may have not had the most negative experiences where they've had a supportive family, school's been all right, just as an example, but they've always known that they're different and they seek a diagnosis to really understand the why, which is the validation of the past experiences. To some, they've lived a life of shame and such high amount of negative experiences, often by the society or the community at large, bullying from childhood or just being misunderstood at every stage of their life, where they do internalize those experiences that turns into depression, anxiety. So I think they deserve a chance to know the why, that there's nothing wrong, they're not a bad person. The labels that people come with are a very long list, many times. Miles, defiant, dislikes being around people, quirky, aloof, weird, bad person. I hear a lot of you're a bad person, right? Like nobody deserves that. And I think shame is a very big one.
Yeah.
Just because of what's being told to them, they carry a lot of shame of, who they are or why are they on the planet. And I really think people deserve a chance to rewrite that.
I want to I want to ask real quick too about the difference of experiences among different kind of groups of the population. So it's been widely talked about that white men are much more likely to be diagnosed, and a lot of the stereotypes around autism really kind of reflect the experiences of white young men. But could you talk a little bit more about other different groups of people and how autism may show up across gender or across different cultural divides?
Autism is everywhere, minds. That is my honest answer. Being in India, Canada, the United States, and of course, meeting people from different walks of life, socially, culturally, socioeconomically, different racial backgrounds. It's there. The issue is there's a very narrow understanding of autism, and it's changing. It's good. Good things are also happening, but that very narrow, rigid understanding of autism is preventing other individuals from getting diagnosed. And to your question, you often see a higher instance of males being diagnosed. Possibly, I don't know the statistics. I may not be the best person to comment on statistics with racial based approaches, but it's getting better. I've definitely seen more white young boys, when I think about my work with early intervention. But I have seen people from different racial backgrounds, but that would be what you would call the earlier presentation of autism that's very visible. as a young child. So things like nonverbal, what the world calls behaviorally challenged. So it is what I would call the apparent or the visible autism. They do get picked up irrespective of racial background or ethnicities, because many people are flagging it. Teachers are flagging it. Early intervention people are flagging it. Daycare people are flagging it. It's disrupting, for the lack of better words, including boys, but largely a lot of females, because they're working on intellect and not intuition, if that makes sense. So many people are forming these friendships more intuitively, whereas they're using their intelligence to navigate the world. And there's a gentleman called Tony Atwood, Dr. Tony Atwood, who describes this beautifully and gracefully. I would urge your audience as well as you, Miles, to look up some videos about how he describes it. But these are the people who are suppressing their autistic traits, and they get missed. They're not disrupting the class. They're, people pleasing. Their people pleasing behaviors, and largely seen among women. So, for example, you're always looking at the classic Thomas the Train, in diagnostic criteria, or do they arrange cars and look at it from a specific angle? Girls are doing it differently. When I speak to them, they talk about, I love my dolls, but that would be seen as imaginative play. But there is an arrangement of dolls, there is a rigidity, there is a ritualistic pattern. So it really also hinges upon a clinician who's able to ask questions beyond that rigid framework of those diagnostic tools. So we are able to, pick up some of this sooner, and they get the right supports. At the end of the day, it's the right supports that matter, just not the label, right?
I love that. We did have a couple comments coming in. Hello to Melissa. Hello to Michael. By the way, join me next week with Michael. We're going to be talking a little bit more about why it is that neurodiverse individuals tend to flourish within engineering, scientific, and highly technical kinds of roles. Looking forward to that conversation with Michael next week. We also had Karen. She left a comment that says, I love the emphasis on flourishing. This needs to be the goal. And we had a comment come in from Autism 101 over on YouTube. I was diagnosed with both autism and ADHD at 57. I always knew I was different. I just didn't know why. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and appreciate you leaving the comment on here. So I want to back up to a phrase that you said right there, the high functioning phrase, because right now that actually highlights a bit of a cultural moment that we're having, where we've even had discussions about quote unquote splitting the spectrum of autism. And I think the challenge is that there are some people that experience it in a way that inhibits them or offers barriers much more significantly than other people, or at least as what's visible on the surface. So could you give us some more language to use so that we could describe it outside of the high functioning or severe autism? How would you describe this so in a way that's a little bit more sensitive?
One, again, inspired by Dr. Tony Atwood, this is not my thought process. Mine is, I stopped using the word diagnosis, again, not in a rigid manner or anything, but I often speak to them about it's a discovery process. And that's, again, something I've been inspired by Dr. Tony Atwood. He is the one that brought up this idea. So my worry about high functioning autism minds, to answer your question, is high functioning is directly equated to really low supports to none. And that's not fair to anybody, right? You're right. There are some people who are significantly impacted, like you mentioned, what you would call more the apparent autism, could be nonverbal, they're flapping their hands, they may need a lot of support all their lives. But that doesn't take away the support that someone else needs. So I like to call it as a discovery process within the neurodivergent spectrum or within the autism spectrum. And that approaches any individual from the lens of honor and respect. But most importantly, what does that translate to? My mind's always thinking about, okay, here is the clinical, but where does clinical meet practical, right? And those are the gaps in the system that I stay away from with the high, low functioning and we need it. I know diagnostic criteria needs it, level 1, level 2, level 3. It also translates to the type of supports, funding, the economics of it in the world. Not my favorite topic, but it also takes away a lot of support for my late diagnosed individuals. And just something about the word high directly translates into low to none supports. And that's what I worry about. So I think it's how we tailor it, it's how we embrace that spectrum, irrespective of where you are on. And most importantly, what does that translate to? So you get the supports, you excel at what you love. And a lot of people also talk about, I found my tribe for the first time. Being diagnosed late, this is the first time I found a place to have a meaningful conversation, meaningful friendship, meaningful club with Dungeons and Dragons, maybe, or whatever that is to each individual, right? Everybody deserves it. I like it. I love to dance. I like to go and do salsa, and everybody deserves a chance to do what they like. I hope I answered your question. I know it wasn't the most clinical
No, yeah,
answer.
it was, and I think too, it's important to note too that the language keeps changing within this space as well too. I imagine that in your 23 years, like the language in of that time has probably changed pretty significantly.
Big
But
time.
I want to change the topic a little bit and talk a little bit more about the specific experience, because some of the people that are watching right now may be wondering to themselves, oh, I have always wanted to go in and discover if I myself am autistic, but they may still have some reservations. They may not know what to expect. So walk us through kind of like what that process looks like of actually getting tested for this and how to interpret the different results that you might hear.
So this would be my past experience as a clinician, Miles, more in Canada, in a clinical capacity. That's where I did most of my diagnostic work in Edmonton, Alberta. And when an individual feels they're different, or have felt, most often they've felt it all their lives, but have either been told you don't look autistic, which is a very sad phrase. I hope people stop saying that to anybody, or you don't look like you have ADHD, either or. So when they often have to go to a clinician. It could be a psychologist. I think based on the state you're in America, or in I can speak for two countries, Canada, it could be a psychologist, it could be a psychiatrist, and there is a formalized diagnostic assessment. And most often we use what we call ADOS, Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. And for adults, you use the fourth module, which is what is administered. And that's, if it's administered in a manner that's not done in a very rigid process where you're sticking to those questions, you are able to discover something beyond what the assessment process would capture. I think that assessment process doesn't always benefit in catching adults, as well as a lot of women that are diagnosed later. So I think it also hinges upon a good clinician to know how to administer it and ask questions beyond the rigid structure that's posed. So once that's scored, you get a diagnosis or you don't get a diagnosis, and that's what would lead to your official diagnosis route. And then you get a clinical report, and it's up to the individual what they do with the clinical report, in terms of disclosure, in terms of, do I want to talk to my workplace, do I want accommodations in my university as I'm doing my doctoral degree, for example. So that is what each individual decides once they're diagnosed.
And like, how long does this process take? How many questions, and what's the cost too typically for an individual?
It is a very expensive assessment, Miles. I don't know the price exactly, what the going rates are in Texas. I think I've Googled a little, and it could be 2,000, 2,500, or upwards and onwards. It is an expensive process. I think it depends on the battery of assessments. Some clinics use a whole battery beyond just the ADOS. So everybody has their approach, but there are standardized ways of approaching this. And to answer that, to your point, that's a really good question you asked. There are many who can't afford. And also wait lists are a real thing. So you are on a long wait list, and what does that look like for you as an individual at home, at work, burnout, inability to maybe work for some time. So there's so many factors that play into it. And some of them may go and get a diagnosis. I think that was in your question as well, and may be told that you do not have autism at the end of an assessment as well. The outcome is either or.
And I think that that's an interesting point to bring up because there is many people that might have been told these kind of derogatory things all throughout their entire life, that you're weird, you're different, you're odd. Like, I hate to even reiterating these phrases, but right,
Exactly.
I think it's important to kind of name the kind of the stigma that's attached to it. Um, and somebody may be hearing this, somebody may go in, seek out a diagnosis, and then they're told that, no, you don't have autism. What would you say to that person for next steps for being able to kind of like handle that information, process that information, and then also seek out support and identity through other means?
And that's actually happened a lot, Miles. I've had individuals that have come to me for therapy, so not for diagnosis, and they have been told that they've gone through the entire process, but they weren't given a diagnosis of autism. Sometimes it could be ADHD or autism and ADHD together. And to me, I believe in every individual being my best teacher. I'm reinforcing that again as I'm talking to you. And I work with their lived experiences and their journey. And if they are expressing that neurodivergent framework or some challenges that they've encountered, I work within that framework. It doesn't matter whether there's a label attached to it or not. I work and I honor the experiences, and we also really work on celebrating what the strengths are. You like Star Wars, write a story about it, or it doesn't matter, but really translating that narrative into a sense of celebration. Because the world often really chases deficits. Even if you look at school, it's what does he not do? What does she not do? IEPs are really written on a very deficit-based model, though the idea is to empower them. But it's really chasing deficits, and that's I kind of try to stay away from that and translate that into a celebration, strength, and the outcomes are way, way better when I approach it that way. So it doesn't matter whether there is a label or not. I think it really, I think for a clinician, a therapist, a coach, consultant, either or whoever is working, maybe teachers, is to really honor that experience, not listen to them from that sense of preconceived judgment about, I know everything about autism. I think it's good to suspend that every time you meet an individual.
And I do want to give a shout out to Michelle. Thank you, Michelle, for your comment there. We need to be allowed to be authentic in our own ways while we each have valuable skills to bring to any workplace and social events. 100%, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
And Karen left a comment right here. There's also been an issue that many practices don't accept Medicaid, and Medicaid is not allowed to pay even when they can afford it. Yeah, there's a lot of barriers, unfortunately, that still continue to persist
Yes.
with being able to get access to a diagnosis as well as kind of the support afterwards. As we look to,
Undoubtedly.
what's that?
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. Like people's comments are very valid, and the barriers list is really long, and that goes back to some systemic issues as well, right?
I'm curious to kind of leverage your perspective as my final question, because right now, even as we're talking about some fragments of our society are talking about quote unquote splitting the spectrum, but I think that the more reasonable adjustment that's being made right now is that some people are even shifting from calling it an autism spectrum to an autism wheel, with the indication of like, let's represent almost as like slices of a pie, how autism may affect different things such as socialization, eye contact, various different other factors that may implement people. So I guess if you could read the tea leaves, if you will, having been in this field for 23 years, what do you think is going to be coming next? And if we had this conversation 5 years from now, what is it going to look like in regards to conversations about autism, and what will that community look like?
Very hard to predict. I don't foresee a lot of changes. Change is a big thing that we expect. But I am really not sure where the splitting, kind of what you commented, Miles, would go to. I hope the key is we're able to pick people at a time when they're going for clinical diagnosis. A lot of people haven't been given the diagnosis when they were young. There's also a lot of misdiagnosis, depression, generalized anxiety. Most often, when they're coming to me at 40, not as a rule, but not uncommon, is they have been given several labels. A lot of individuals have grown with oppositional defiant disorder and whatnot, generalized anxiety disorder. And there is anxiety, but so many times it's under the umbrella of autism. So more than the split or lots of different language and vocabulary around it, and the wheel that you were talking about, and I'm aware of that too. To me, I'm always more concerned about what is the supports that it translates to. For example, to answer your question, we had Asperger's syndrome back in 2003, 4 when I started my journey. So I remember, writing reports, autism, and to the individuals that were diagnosed with autism spectrum and Asperger's. I don't know if it did anything different, but at least back in Alabama, there was a level of supports that we were able to advocate for in schools. I just don't see a whole lot of difference in the adult world. Whether we split it into Asperger's, again, for example, or just do a split within that pie, my worry is always, where does clinical meet practical, right? What is that vocabulary in terms of embracing it? What is that vocabulary in terms of not limiting the expectations so the individual can be who they are? The diagnosis gives us an understanding and maybe the right environmental accommodations in some case, but the person is who they are and they deserve to be who they are at the end of the day. So I know, I just don't know what it would look like, but my emphasis is really the quality of supports, because that really determines what does the burnout look like. Are we making an effort to reduce the burnout? Is the quality of life getting better? What is that self-esteem, your self-narrative? Are we removing the criticism, that judgment, that blame, shame? And a lot of those lived experiences people have grown up with, like one of the comments the viewers made, just be your authentic self, right?
Yeah. I think with that question, I'm hoping to project some of my hopes for the future, right? I hope that we will continue to see a lessening of stigmas around having autism. I also hope, too, that with all the neurodiverse hiring programs that are proliferating in corporate America, I'm hoping that we can move beyond just recruitment over to retention and better inclusion, as well as support. After all, there's a big gap between assimilation versus inclusion. And I think that that's still a huge gap to overcome, because many businesses may be hiring people with autism, but they may not actually be adjusting their processes, which is kind of sort of the whole point of the ADA. The whole point of all of this is to really be able to support people where they're at, and provide them the necessary accommodations so that they can do the essential functions of their job. And I also look to at the next generation that's coming up behind. I'm looking at Gen Z. 50% of them are self-identifying as neurodiverse, and keep in mind that's a spectrum, so that might be autism, but it also might be anxiety disorder, depression, might be traumatic brain injury, might be anxiety disorder, etc. So the full spectrum. But I am hoping that with that groundswell, that we'll see more and more people just come to a overall consensus that it's okay to be different, and that it is celebrated to be different as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I look at it as, Miles, if I may just quickly add something. We all think, perceive, feel, and see the world differently. I see it differently from my sister, from my husband, my children. We all view it different. And it's just a different way of seeing, perceiving, thinking, and viewing the world. And that's okay. Diversity is beautiful.
I love it. Diversity is beautiful. And thank you, everybody that did join us live. Rupa, where can people find you and what are you working on these days?
I am working on building my website, but people can find me on LinkedIn. They can send me a message. I'm pretty quick at answering. But if you also want to reach me directly, it's roopari@gmail.com. Send me an email if you want to talk to me, get services or not get services, either or. I'm always happy to nerd out, have a conversation, and LinkedIn is a great platform as well. I will update my website, domain address, and everything as it's in the works on my LinkedIn as well very soon.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Rupa. I appreciate you joining me today. And if you are available, please join me next week for another episode of Disability Weekly. In the meantime, have a great weekend, everyone, and bye for now.
Thank you so much, Miles.